The aircraft fell into complete silence at 30,000 feet. Flight 623 from Los Angeles to Portland, carrying 148 passengers and 6 crew, lost every communication system in an instant. No radios, no transponders, no intercom. Then, both pilots lost consciousness. In a cabin filled with professionals, lawyers, surgeons, professors, the only person capable of landing the plane was a 10-year-old girl everyone had dismissed as just another child traveling alone. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible survival stories. Emma Hayes occupied seat 19A, her sneakers dangling above the floor as she worked through a puzzle book. The flight attendant passing by offered a warm smile to the petite girl with braided hair and a backpack covered in cartoon patches. "Doing okay, sweetheart?" the attendant asked, kneeling to Emma's level. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Orange juice, please," Emma replied politely, her green eyes innocent and bright. "Of course, honey. Flying alone to visit family?" Emma nodded. "My aunt in Portland. She's taking me to see the waterfalls." "That sounds wonderful. What grade are you in?" "Fifth. I'm 10. The attendant patted her arm gently. "You're being very mature, flying by yourself. If you need anything, just press this button here." "Thank you," Emma said sweetly, returning to her puzzle book. The gentleman in 19B, a corporate executive in his 50s, glanced over with a friendly smile. "First solo flight?" "Yes, sir." "I remember mine at your age. Nerve-wracking, right? But you're handling it well. Just relax, enjoy the flight, and you'll be in Portland before you know it." Emma nodded, clutching her small stuffed bear. To everyone around her, she appeared exactly as expected. An ordinary 10-year-old on her first unaccompanied journey, completely dependent on adult guidance. What none of them knew was what lay beneath that innocent appearance. Emma's father, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes, had flown military transport aircraft for 18 years before a training accident 2 years prior left him with severe injuries. Unable to return to active duty, he channeled every ounce of his aviation passion into teaching his daughter. Initially, her mother objected. "She's barely 10 years old, Daniel. Let her have a childhood." But her father insisted with unwavering intensity. "The world doesn't care about age in an emergency, Lisa. If she has the knowledge, she has a chance. If she doesn't..." He never finished that sentence. Thus began Emma's extraordinary education. While classmates attended gymnastics and art classes, Emma spent countless hours in her father's home office, surrounded by flight manuals, aviation software, and emergency protocol guides. "What do you do when communication fails?" her father would quiz during meals. "Squawk 7600, Emma would respond, citing the transponder code for radio failure. "And if the pilots are incapacitated, check autopilot status, attempt ground contact through any available channel, and if required, assume manual control." Her mother would shift uncomfortably during these discussions, troubled by the dark scenarios being drilled into her young daughter's mind. But Emma absorbed everything. Her father had installed professional-grade flight simulation software, the same type used for actual pilot certification. Night after night, Emma practiced crisis scenarios: engine failure, hydraulic malfunction, electrical fire, total communication blackout. "In aviation, instinct is built through repetition," her father would explain, watching her small hands manipulate the controls with growing proficiency. "When disaster strikes, conscious thought freezes. But if your muscles know the response, they'll execute automatically." He made her repeat emergency procedures hundreds of times until they became reflexive. Manual trim adjustment, visual-only navigation, dead-stick landing with no engine power, weather interpretation from cloud patterns alone. "Dad, when would I ever need this?" Emma asked one night after a 4-hour session. Her father's eyes seemed to focus on something far away. "Hopefully never, but if that day comes, you'll understand why preparation matters." Emma thought he was being paranoid. Sitting in seat 19A at 30,000 feet, she would discover how prophetic those words were. Flight 623 was a standard afternoon service. The Boeing 737 carried 148 passengers and 6 crew. Captain Thomas Blake and First Officer Jennifer Park had flown together for 3 years. "Weather's clear all the way to PDX," Park commented as they reached cruising altitude. "Should be an easy flight," Blake agreed. In the cabin, Emma had set aside her puzzle book and opened her tablet. The woman across the aisle leaned over conversationally. "Playing games?" "Yes, ma'am. Word puzzles." Emma lied smoothly. Actually, she was reviewing a flight simulator app her father installed, but she'd learned not to mention this. Then something caught her attention. The cabin lights flickered, just briefly, but Emma noticed. She'd spent enough simulator time to know lights don't flicker without reason. She glanced at the overhead panel. Everything appeared normal. Perhaps she'd imagined it. Then it happened again. A brief flicker, followed by subtle dimming. The flight attendant in the aisle paused, frowning. She picked up the intercom phone. Emma watched as confusion crossed the attendant's face. "Captain Blake, this is cabin." She waited. Tried again. "Cockpit, do you copy?" Nothing. In the cockpit, Captain Blake was experiencing his own confusion. "Radio's dead," he told Park, adjusting his headset. "Mine too," Park confirmed. "Try backup frequency." Blake switched channels. Static, emergency frequency, more static. Every channel, complete silence. "Intercom's not working either," Park added. "This doesn't make sense," Blake muttered. "Full electrical power, but zero communication." Unknown to either pilot, a rare electromagnetic interference event was occurring, caused by unusual solar radiation interacting with atmospheric conditions and the aircraft's electrical systems. The phenomenon knocked out every transmitter and receiver while temporarily leaving other systems functional. "Squawk 7600, Blake said, entering the transponder code for communication failure. But the transponder showed offline. "We're completely blind," Park said. "Ground control has no idea what's happening." Before either could act further, the electromagnetic interference intensified. An energy surge coursed through the aircraft's wiring. The pilot's displays flickered wildly. Then both pilots were exposed to a brief but powerful electromagnetic pulse. Combined with rapid decompression from a small cockpit seal failure, they lost consciousness almost instantly. In the cabin, passengers felt slight pressure change. Automated systems detected the cockpit decompression and sealed it off, protecting passengers but trapping the unconscious pilots. The aircraft, now on autopilot with no conscious crew, continued flying straight and level at 30,000 feet. For several minutes, no one realized the pilots were incapacitated. Flight attendants, unable to reach the cockpit via intercom, assumed the pilots were troubleshooting. Emma, however, was reading signs that adults around her couldn't interpret. The failed intercom, the way flight attendants congregated at the front speaking urgently. Most tellingly, the aircraft was flying too straight, too level, with no corrections for over 15 minutes. Autopilot with no human oversight. The senior flight attendant, named Susan, tried the cockpit entry code. No response. Protocol required pilots to unlock within 30 seconds. Nearly 3 minutes had passed. "We need emergency access," Susan told her colleague quietly. She used the emergency override and opened the cockpit door. What she saw made her freeze. Both pilots slumped unconscious in their seats. Captain Blake's head had fallen forward. First Officer Park had collapsed sideways. Susan immediately placed oxygen masks over their faces and checked pulses. Both alive but completely unresponsive. She needed to find anyone who could fly. But the intercom wasn't working. She'd have to ask directly. As Susan emerged, pale and trembling, Emma knew instantly what had happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Susan called out, voice carrying through the cabin. "We have a critical emergency. Both pilots are unable to fly. Is anyone here a pilot?" The question struck like lightning. Passengers gasped. Someone screamed. A baby began crying. "Please, is anyone a pilot?" Susan repeated desperately. Silence. Fear. Whispered prayers. Emma's hands gripped her stuffed bear. Her father's voice echoed, "If you know something that could save lives, you must act, regardless of fear." But she was 10 years old. Who would believe her? The executive in 19B spoke up. "Can't we just follow autopilot?" Susan shook her head. "Autopilot maintains heading and altitude. It can't navigate to an airport or land. Without pilot input, we'll fly until fuel runs out." More gasps. A man from first class stood. "I flew helicopters in the Navy, but that was 15 years ago. Never anything this size." "Please come forward," Susan said. "Any help is better than none." As the man moved toward the cockpit, Emma unbuckled and stood up. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Sweetie, sit down," the woman beside her said. "Adults will handle this." "But I can help." "Honey, please sit. This isn't a game." Emma's voice strengthened. "I know how to fly. My father was Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes. He taught me emergency procedures. I've trained on simulators for 2 years. I can fly this plane." Several passengers turned to look. Some smiled sadly. Others looked annoyed. "That's sweet, dear," an older man said, "but we need real pilots." "I'm not pretending," Emma insisted. "I know the procedures. I can read instruments. I know how to navigate and land. Please let me help." Susan finally turned to look at her. For a moment, their eyes met. Susan saw something that gave her pause. Not childish fantasy, but genuine knowledge. "How old are you?" 10. "But I know what to do, please." The Navy pilot, now at the cockpit door, looked back skeptically. "Ma'am, with respect, we can't let a child fly." "Do you know what EFIS displays are?" Emma asked him directly. "Can you identify the PFD versus the ND? Do you know how to work the FCU or FMS?" The man blinked, not recognizing half the terminology. Susan made a decision. "What's your name?" "Emma Hayes." "Emma, come with me. Sir, you too. Between you both, maybe we have a chance." As Emma walked toward the cockpit, passengers stared in disbelief. This small girl with braids and a stuffed bear might be their only hope. The cockpit was overwhelming. 2 unconscious pilots, countless displays and controls, and 154 lives depending on what happened next. "Do you really know what you're doing?" the Navy pilot asked. Emma moved to the first officer's seat and began scanning instruments systematically. "Autopilot engaged, mode LNAV and VNAV," she said aloud. "Altitude holding 30,000 feet, heading 330 degrees, airspeed 470 knots, fuel showing 7,200 kilograms, engines normal, all systems green except communications." Susan and the Navy pilot stared. This wasn't a child guessing. "How long until fuel runs out?" Susan asked. Emma calculated quickly. "Approximately 2 hours, 30 minutes at current consumption." "Can you land this plane?" Emma took a deep breath. "I've never landed a real aircraft. Only simulators. But I know the procedures. The problem is no radio communication. We can't contact air traffic control or coordinate with airports. What do we do?" Emma's mind raced through her training. "First, assess our exact position. Then identify the nearest suitable airport. Descend and navigate visually. Attempt landing, all without radio." "That's insane," Susan whispered. "You're 10 years old." "Would you rather I try?" the Navy pilot asked. "Because I barely recognize half these instruments." "No," Susan said finally. "I think Emma is our best chance." Emma touched the control yoke carefully. I need help. I can't fly and monitor everything alone. What's your name, sir? David Chen. Mr. Chen, I need you in the captain's seat reading instruments when I ask. Can you identify the altitude indicator? David looked at the display. The number saying 30,000? Yes. That's altitude. Next to it is airspeed. The artificial horizon shows pitch and bank. Those three are most important right now. David settled into the captain's seat. I think I can manage that. Emma pulled out charts and analyzed their position. Without GPS or radio, I'll navigate using dead reckoning and visual landmarks. We departed Los Angeles for Portland at 1:45 p.m. We've been flying approximately 45 minutes. She traced the route. We should be over Northern California, probably near Mount Shasta. If I'm right, we need to identify landmarks to confirm position, then navigate to the nearest suitable airport. How will we find it? We'll look for it, Emma said simply. Once below clouds, we find a city, identify the airport, and land. Susan shook her head in amazement. You really think you can do this? Emma looked up with eyes both terrified and determined. I don't know, but I'll try. She reached for the autopilot controls. I'm disconnecting autopilot and taking manual control. Ready? Wait, David said. Shouldn't we leave autopilot on? No, we need to descend soon while we have fuel. Every minute at 30,000 feet is a minute we can't see landmarks. Also, I need to feel how the aircraft handles before landing. Better to practice now with altitude. It made sense. David nodded. Ready? Emma placed her small hands on the yoke. Her feet barely reached the rudder pedals, but she could manage. Disconnecting autopilot in 3, 2, 1. She pressed the disconnect button. A soft alarm chimed. Suddenly, the aircraft was hers. The yoke had weight and resistance unlike anything in simulators. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed. Then her father's voice returned. The aircraft wants to fly. Work with it. She made a tiny adjustment. The aircraft responded perfectly, banking slightly before she centered it. You're flying it, David whispered in awe. Maintaining heading 330, altitude 30,000, Emma confirmed. Now I'm executing descent, reducing power and lowering nose gradually. Her hand reached for throttle levers, pulling them back slightly. Then she pushed the yoke forward gently, watching altitude decrease. Descending, target altitude 10,000 feet for visual navigation, descent rate 1,500 feet per minute. The nose dipped. Passengers felt the descent and exchanged worried glances. In the cockpit, a 10-year-old girl was flying a commercial airliner through pure knowledge and determination. Finding the way. At 25,000 feet, Emma leveled off temporarily. Through the windows, she could see landscape taking shape. Mountains, forests, what looked like a large lake. That must be Crater Lake, she said, pointing. Which means we're over Oregon. I need a landmark I can match to the chart. For 10 minutes, Emma scanned terrain while maintaining steady flight. Her eyes caught something, a distinctive mountain peak. There, she pointed. That's Mount Hood, which means we're here. She traced her finger on the chart. Approximately 100 miles south of Portland. So where's the nearest airport? Susan asked. Emma studied the chart. Eugene is about 60 miles south. It has long runways. That's our best option. How do we find it without navigation? Visual navigation, Emma explained. We follow Interstate 5 north. It runs through Eugene. Once we see the city, we look for the airport. David shook his head. You're navigating by highway. That's how pilots flew before radio navigation existed, Emma said. It's our only option now. She adjusted heading, bringing the aircraft northwest. Below, she could make out the thin line of I-5 cutting through Oregon landscape. There's the highway, she confirmed. Follow that to Eugene. Descent continued. At 15,000 feet, turbulence shook the aircraft. Emma's hands tightened, making constant, tiny corrections. Her training was paying off. "Altitude 15,000 feet, David called out. "Airspeed 340 knots. Good. Continuing descent to 10,000 feet, then leveling off to navigate to Eugene." Susan watched this small girl flying with growing amazement. "Emma, how are you staying calm?" "I'm not calm," Emma admitted. "I'm terrified. But Dad taught me that in emergencies, you do what needs to be done. You think about fear later." At 10,000 feet, Emma leveled off. The landscape was much clearer. Following the highway became easier. "How much longer?" Susan asked. Emma checked time and calculated. "Approximately 10 to 12 minutes at current speed. Then we identify the airport and set up for landing." Minutes ticked by. Emma kept the aircraft steady, following the highway north. Then, in the distance, she saw it. "That's Eugene," she announced. "Now I find the airport." She knew Eugene Airport was northwest of the city center. She scanned for the distinctive runway layout. "There," David pointed. Emma looked. 2 runways and a cross pattern, several hangars, unmistakable airport layout. "That's it," she confirmed. "Now comes the hard part." Emma circled the airport at 8,000 feet, assessing carefully. She could see emergency vehicles gathering below. "They know something's wrong," Susan observed. "Good," Emma said. "At least emergency equipment will be ready." She studied the runways. "I need to choose which runway. Wind direction is crucial." She looked at flags on buildings below, checking which way they blew. "Wind from the southwest. Runway 16 is best. We'll land into the wind." "How do you know this?" David asked. "Dad drilled it into me. Landing into wind gives better control and shorter landing distance." Emma took a deep breath. "Beginning our approach. This will take 10 to 15 minutes from current position to touchdown. I need absolute silence unless I ask something. Can you both do that?" Susan and David nodded. "Mr. Chen, read out altitude and airspeed when I ask. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Okay." Emma's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Beginning approach to runway 16. She began a wide descending turn, setting up for left downwind approach, flying parallel to the runway in opposite direction, then turning to a line for landing. Her hands moved across controls with practiced precision. Throttle adjustment, yoke pressure, trim wheel, every movement deliberate. "Altitude?" she asked. 6,000 feet, David called. "Airspeed 270 knots. Too fast. Reducing power." Emma pulled throttle back. The aircraft descended smoothly. Below, the airport grew larger. "Extending flaps to position 1. The aircraft shuddered slightly as wing flaps deployed, increasing lift and allowing slower speed without stalling. "Altitude 4,000 feet, airspeed 210 knots. "Good! Turning to base leg." Emma banked left, perpendicular to the runway. This was critical. She needed to judge timing perfectly. Flaps to position 2. More drag, more lift, slower speed. The aircraft transformed from fast cruiser into something more controllable for landing. "Altitude 2,500 feet, airspeed 170 knots. The runway was perpendicular now, off the left side. Emma judged distance, counted to 3, then began final turn. Turning final approach. The aircraft banked left and suddenly, through the windshield, the runway appeared directly ahead. A long strip of concrete beckoning them toward Earth. "On final, extending landing gear." She moved the gear lever down. The aircraft shuddered as landing gear descended and locked. 3 green lights confirmed all gear down. "Gear down and locked," David confirmed. "Flaps full." Emma extended flaps to maximum landing position. The aircraft slowed further, now flying approximately 140 knots. The runway was dead ahead, growing larger every second. Altitude 1,000 feet. Airspeed 140 knots. Perfect, Emma whispered. We're on glide path. In the cabin, passengers pressed against windows, watching ground rush toward them. Some prayed, some held hands, some closed their eyes. Susan stood in the cockpit doorway, hand over her mouth, watching a 10-year-old girl attempt the impossible. At 500 feet, Emma began the final phase, the flare. This was the most critical moment. Too high and the plane would stall and drop hard. Too low and they'd slam into runway. Altitude 400 feet. The runway filled her entire vision now. She could see threshold markers approaching rapidly. 300 feet. Her hands made micro-adjustments. The aircraft's descent slowed as she began raising the nose. 200 feet. Almost there. 100 feet. Concrete so close now. 50 feet. Now. Emma pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose. The aircraft's descent slowed dramatically as the nose lifted and wings provided maximum lift. For a moment, they seemed to float. Then, with a jolt, the main wheels touched down. The impact was harder than it should have been. Emma had flared slightly late, but the landing gear held. The aircraft bounced slightly, came down again, and stayed down. "We're down!" David shouted. But Emma's work wasn't finished. The aircraft was traveling over 100 miles per hour. She needed to stop it. "Thrust reversers!" She pulled thrust levers into reverse. The engines roared, creating reverse thrust. "Brakes!" She pressed brake pedals with all her strength, feeling the aircraft's momentum fighting back. The aircraft decelerated rapidly. Emma could see the runway end approaching. "Come on!" she whispered. "Stop!" The brakes screamed. The tires smoked. The aircraft shook violently. 3,000 feet of runway left. 2,000, 1,000. Speed dropped below 50 knots, then 30, then 20. At 500 feet from runway's end, Flight 623 came to complete stop. Absolute silence filled the cockpit. Then Susan started crying. David slumped in his seat, shaking. And Emma Hayes, 10 years old, slowly released the control yoke and began trembling uncontrollably. "You did it," Susan whispered. "Dear God, you actually did it." In the cabin, silence broke as passengers erupted in applause, cheers, and sobs of relief. A 10-year-old girl had just saved 154 lives. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within seconds. Paramedics rushed aboard to attend the unconscious pilots, who were beginning to regain consciousness. Captain Blake would later say he remembered nothing between trying to restore radio communication and waking in a hospital. Emma was led from the cockpit by Susan, still trembling, still processing what happened. As she emerged into the cabin, passengers stood and applauded. Some touched her shoulders, others stared in amazement. "You saved us," a businesswoman said, tears streaming. "You saved all of us." The executive from 19B, who had told her to sit down, approached with tears. "I'm sorry I didn't listen. You're a hero." Emma didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and desperate to see her mother. As she descended the aircraft stairs, she was met by airport officials, emergency responders, and growing crowds. News helicopters circled overhead. An FAA official stepped forward. "Young lady, I need to speak with you about what happened." Emma looked up with tired eyes. "Am I in trouble?" His expression softened. "Trouble? You just accomplished something extraordinary. We need to understand how a 10-year-old was capable of flying and landing a commercial airliner." Over the following hours, Emma repeated her story. Her father's training, the simulators, the emergency procedures drilled into memory. When Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayes received the call, he wept. His wife, Lisa, who had always questioned whether the intense training was appropriate, finally understood. By evening, Emma's story was international news. 10-year-old girl lands commercial jet after pilots incapacitated. For Emma, the most important moment came when her parents arrived. Her mother burst in and wrapped her in the tightest hug. "I'm sorry," Lisa sobbed. "I'm sorry I ever questioned your father's training. You were prepared, and you saved everyone." Her father arrived, tears streaming. "I'm proud of you, but I hope you never have to use those skills again." "Me too, Dad," Emma said, climbing into his lap. "Me too." The investigation revealed the electromagnetic interference had been caused by rare solar activity and atmospheric conditions, compounded by a minor electrical fault. A 1-in-a-million event that left both pilots briefly unconscious while leaving autopilot functional. Captain Blake and First Officer Park recovered fully and returned to flying, forever grateful to the small girl who saved their lives and everyone else's. Emma Hayes became the youngest person ever to receive accommodation from the FAA. She was invited to the White House, appeared on talk shows, received letters from around the world. But the attention made her uncomfortable. She was still a 10-year-old who wanted to play with friends and be normal. One quiet evening, months later, Emma sat with her father in his study, surrounded by the aviation equipment that had prepared her. "Do you regret teaching me?" she asked. "Never," her father said firmly. "You were prepared when the world needed you. That's all any parent can hope for." "I was so scared the whole time." "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared," he explained. "It means doing what needs to be done despite fear. You did that." Emma looked at the simulator. "I don't think I want to be a pilot anymore. Is that okay?" Her father smiled. "It's perfectly okay. You've proven you can fly. Now choose whatever makes you happy. Maybe you'll be a doctor, teacher, or artist. It doesn't matter. You'll always know that when it mattered most, you were capable of something extraordinary." "I just want to be a regular kid again." "Then that's what you'll be." But Emma Hayes would never truly be regular again. She was the girl who at 10 years old had taken the pilot's seat at 30,000 feet when the plane went silent. She was the girl who saved 154 lives through knowledge, courage, and determination. The story of Emma Hayes would be told in aviation circles for generations, not as a miracle, but as proof that preparation, knowledge, and courage can come in the smallest, most unexpected packages. And somewhere in the sky, on routine flights between cities, pilots would occasionally look at young passengers and wonder, could another Emma be aboard, quietly carrying knowledge that might one day save lives? The answer, as the world learned, was that heroes come in all ages. Sometimes the smallest hands can guide the largest machine safely home. What would you have done in Emma's place? Would you have spoken up despite being just a child? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe so you never miss another tale of courage and survival. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are hiding in plain sight.